behind Charles, and in that moment, for sure, I was like, "Come on, like this."
This is Ferrari, a team with decades of experience and often fielding world-class drivers like Michael Schumacher, Eddie Irvine and Kimi Raikkonen. But now the Scuderia has their hands on arguably the greatest driver in history, Lewis Hamilton. But it simply doesn't work. The seven-time world champion is already frustrated with his new team and specifically Ferrari's infamous reputation of delivering the perfect strategies. Even Charles is feeling the pain following the Miami Grand Prix, so let's find out what the heck is going on in Maranello. A dream partnership. When you think of Lewis Hamilton, moments like this and this, these moments solidify the incredible legacy that Lewis Hamilton currently has. In fact, many still refer to him as arguably the greatest driver in history. On the other hand, Ferrari is by far the most successful and historically significant constructor in the sport. Not only have they been around the longest, but they've also won the most drivers and constructors titles. Thanks to these moves, the Italians have built a legacy in the sport and almost every driver wants to have their names associated with the Scuderia at least once in their careers. Historical drivers and legends like Gerhard Berger, Niki Lauda and more recently Michael Schumacher have all helped elevate the Italian outfit to the world-renowned team in motorsport history. But it's only once in a generation that you get a generational talent actually making the move to the biggest team in history. This was the case when Ferrari announced back in 2024 that Lewis Hamilton will be driving for the Maranello-based side from 2025. Obviously, the rumour mill began ringing, with questions of how Lewis and Charles will get along. Will Ferrari prioritise one driver? And exactly what will they be doing to fix the strategy issues currently hanging like a dark cloud over the garage? But it seems like none of these have come to fruition, and if the Miami Grand Prix is anything to go by, Ferrari is still sitting with the same problems they had back in 2022. Back then, Charles had an actual chance to compete with Max Verstappen for the title, but decision problems and making the right calls would ultimately contribute along with durability issues to stop Leclerc's bid at the title. The same thing happened to Vettel upon moving to Ferrari, preventing the German from winning another title. But when it comes to Lewis, you have a star driver who's not going to let Ferrari damage his reputation, a man willing to speak up and force change. But it could mean that Lewis might prematurely end his career to protect this reputation. Being outdriven by Charles. Instead of just focusing on the Ferrari blunder when it came to strategy at the Miami Grand Prix, it is also important to look at why Lewis has been struggling. With 5 races in the books, Ferrari has gathered a lot of data. Statisticians at Maranello have checked everything from telemetry to steering inputs, and it just seems like what initially made Lewis fast at Mercedes could be the one thing counting against him now. Whilst a highly instinctive driver and often known for his late braking, Lewis Hamilton has been struggling a fair bit to come to grips with the Ferrari. One example of this is seen following the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix when Lewis had the following to say. "No, there wasn't 1 second where I felt comfortable with the car. Well, clearly the car is capable of being P3, so Charles did a great job today, so I can't blame it on the car. I have no idea why I'm not experiencing the same joy as he is." This is quite a riveting statement from the former world champion, leading to speculation about whether Lewis might just be regressing to such a level that he's no longer a great driver. But what about China? Yes, the Ferraris didn't run well in the main race, but the sprint would finish in a victory for the Scuderia. Moreover, Lewis also earned another sprint podium at the race in Miami, clearly showing that short runs are good for the Ferrari and it can muster up some decent pace. However, something that has been biting the whole grid is now also biting the Ferrari, and that's the desire for these cars to run in clean air. Since the Ferrari cannot reach the front of the grid, having clean air is impossible. But when they do manage it, results like the podium in Saudi Arabia can become a reality. So aside from the car specs and Charles with a little more experience now outdriving Lewis, there could be a good reason for this, and it all hinges on personal driving style. Lewis's driving style not working. Similar to a younger Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen, Lewis is used to a pointy car with a little more oversteer than other drivers would prefer. This is mainly due to the fact that Lewis likes to drive with instinct, letting his feeling of the car guide him into what moves and lines to take. Meanwhile, Ferrari is carefully balancing this aggressive setup with a more conservative approach, which requires the drivers to be perfect. Now, Lewis can be this kind of driver, nailing every braking zone and setting up the car for chains of corners, but it's not what makes him naturally fast. Since Lewis approaches the corner and then gets on the brakes a little later than others, he often makes the coveted dive bomb stick. But for this to happen, you need to make sure that the rear of the car is in the optimal position. Yes, the rear should be extremely stable and often have a lot of downforce applied. It is such a design that back in 2020 allowed Lewis to not only win but absolutely dominate the season. Unfortunately, the Ferrari is still a little loose in the rear, meaning that the style that Lewis is used to driving with at Mercedes simply doesn't work now and will need to be revised, something the Brit has managed to correct and come to terms with following the Miami Grand Prix. Had Lewis managed to get past Charles sooner, the race could have been different, and Lewis might have been able to hunt down Kimi Antonelli. Which brings us to another big problem: Ferrari strategies just suck. Ferrari's bad strategy calls. Since the arrival of Carlos, but even dating back as far as the Vettel-Raikkonen era, Ferrari has been struggling when it comes to team orders. Now, in the most recent incident, one can arguably say that had Ferrari allowed Lewis to overtake Charles earlier, he could have been able to chase after Kimi. In fact, Lewis caught Charles by almost a second a lap, but a lot of this can also be attributed to Charles squabbling with Carlos. It took Ferrari 4 laps of telling Lewis to stick in Leclerc's DRS before shifting the cars. This took a decent chunk of life out of Lewis's tyres, leaving him with warm tyres, now chasing down Antonelli. By now, Charles had rubbered in his tyres and nurtured them to have the optimal temperature and allow the monogasque to simply stick in Lewis's slipstream while also complaining about dirty air. It's no wonder Lewis felt frustrated by these orders, but it still doesn't solve the problem of why Lewis is not battling for the title. This can also be traced back to Ferrari, and despite having a great season last year, coming second in the Constructors, they've simply not managed to capitalise on this. Mercedes are catching up, and thanks to Verstappen, Red Bull will remain a podium contender, even if it is only for P3. Essentially, Lewis is feeling a little demoralised and possibly even frustrated, but this is just part of the territory. Ferrari loves to screw up strategies, which often cost them championships. But what do you think? Will Lewis ever match Charles and win number 8? Let us know in the comments.